Hello students! Today we are going to talk about one of my favorite chapters, which is chapter 4, which is where we get into learning about style, form, and content in works of art. And I love this chapter because I love analyzing artwork and trying to figure out what it's all about. And you will have an assignment connected with this that will probably take the place of one of your other assignments, because when I was putting this together I was sort of going on the fly, so forgive me for that. But you will be asked to actually analyze a work of art based on what we're looking at in Chapter 4 and also what we've learned previously about the elements and the principles of design. So here on our opening slide we have a photograph of the abstract expressionist Jackson Pollock, and he was known for his splatter paintings, as they're sometimes called. He was also called an action painter because he, as you can see, kind of actively involved his entire body in creating a work of art, and it was kind of a very athletic thing to be jumping up and down and splattering artwork or splattering paint all over the place. So let's get in and look at some of this work and talk about what exactly the words style, form, and content mean and why are they important to art. So we have a quote here from another artist, Philip Johnson, and he says, "The duty of an artist is to strain against the bonds of the existing style." And so this in a lot of ways applies to artists, because through the years what we see is artists making innovations and artists changing the pattern of things. We have with the Impressionists, when they first began working, they were made fun of, and their work was actually called impressionistic because it was seen as a negative thing, that they were just giving impressions of what they saw. Now people look at Impressionist work and see it as old-fashioned and maybe a little bit too sweet or too pretty. But at the time it was earth-shattering. So they were straining against the bonds of their existing style and their existing time. So there's several characteristic methods of expression that have developed that are referred to as style. So it's essentially how an artist is handling the elements of art and principles of design. They have their own special way of dealing with that, and that is what makes a style a style. So the content of a work includes not only its form, so its formal elements like color, line, texture, pattern, etc., but also its subject matter, what it's about, and its underlying meanings or themes. An awareness of style, form, and content helps the viewer understand and appreciate the arts, the visual arts, more fully. With the language of art, we are able to communicate thoughts and feelings about our visual and tactile experiences in our world. So style is the distinctive or the handling of distinctive elements and particular media throughout the various artistic periods associated with the work of an individual artist, a school or a movement, or a specific culture or time period. And you will also hear the term context. And context can be very important to a work of art. Context is essentially the how, what, where, why, and when of a work of art. So variations in style can be linked to the use of different media, diverse cultural contexts, the characteristic approach of the artist to the subject. And a quote from the book, "Context has a profound influence on style, because if I were an artist painting in the 19th century, perhaps I'm hanging out in cafes in Paris and I'm hanging out with the Impressionists. That's my context. And if I'm hanging out with the Impressionists, chances are good that they are going to be influencing the work that I do as an artist." And one of the best ways to illustrate stylistic differences is to examine a group of artworks with a common theme. So for the purposes of this chapter, we're looking at the couple. And the works of most artists is a product of their culture and time. And there are lots of styles in art. They change often, however, there are some standards. And a little caveat on that, in art history, there are many styles, but it seems like after the 18th and 19th centuries, there's an explosion of styles, and styles changing much more rapidly. So the first couple that we're going to look at is this amorous couple here from the Mayans. This was created about 700 to 900 AD or CE for Common Era. And this is a three-dimensional work. It's a polychromed ceramic, meaning it was originally, you can still see some paint clinging to it. Originally, it would have been painted in a lot of different colors. And you can see it's an amorous couple. It's a woman. She's a little taller than the man, and he's doing something to her leg there. So that is one style. You could say it's a Mayan style. You could say it's a pre-Columbian style, meaning that it is a work of art in the Americas before the arrival of Columbus. Now this next painting, and this is a painting, it's not a comic book, but it looks like it's comic book style. It's by Roy Lichtenstein, and this work is called Forget It, Forget Me. And you would say, looking at the message on there, that, you know, it's not a very positive reference to relationships. But this style that he's painting in is called pop art, and that's short for popular art, because artists who paint in a pop art style are taking their cues from popular culture. So here he's using comic books as popular culture. Andy Warhol did something very similar. He was very obsessed with celebrity culture, and he also did artworks of things like Campbell's soup cans. So not only was that popular, but it was something you could buy in your supermarket. Post-Impressionism is what we're seeing here in this drawing with oil sticks by Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. And Toulouse-Lautrec, he's a post-impressionist, so that tells you a little something about the time period. He is after the Impressionists, although he's influenced by the Impressionists. And one of the things that Toulouse-Lautrec loved to take as his subject matter was things going on in the nightclubs of Paris. And so here we have two girlfriends. It's two women in a couple. So again, something very different. And we're looking at all different kinds of couples in this chapter. So the next one is a same-sex couple of two men. This was photographed by Robert Mapplethorpe, and he is our photographer who passed away from AIDS sometime in the 1990s. But before he died, he liked to document all kinds of gay couples, again, trying to erase some of the stigma of homosexuality. And then another style that we might explore is Expressionism. Expressionism is an interesting style, which we'll get into the dictionary term a little bit more in a little bit. But here you can say something is painted in an expressionistic style if the artist is using brush strokes that maybe feel very emotional. He's using colors that feel very emotional. He's more interested in expressing a mood or something like that than capturing something very realistically. And I like looking at this because it says to me, it looks as though there's this couple and they're in this really kind of chaotic environment, but they're together and they're sleeping. So it kind of says to me that you can be surrounded by all kinds of chaos, but if you're together, it's kind of okay. And then minimalism is yet another style. In minimalism, an artist is taking the subject matter and reducing it to the least amount of visual information you need to have in order to know what's going on. So this is Konstantin Brancusi's The Kiss from 1912. This was very popular in the 1960s because I think it just felt, I don't know, 60s-ish. But you can see it's a man and a woman, and Brancusi has pretty much reduced all of the information you need to know that this is a man and woman down to the very bare elements. You can tell that there's a bump where the breast should be for the woman. You can tell also that her hair is longer than the man's, so that also is an indicator that it's a male-female couple. Then with abstract expressionism, you can be expressionistic, but everything is completely abstracted in that there's nothing resembling anything out of nature here except maybe, okay, there's a pair of eyes. I'm moving my cursor up to the eyes. And down here we have what could maybe be feet. And then, of course, recognizable over here are numbers. So this is a somewhat sexist piece, but considering that it was painted in 1942, we might give it a pass. People might think that on the right side, that would be the male side, and on the left is the female side because the eyes have such glamorous eyelashes. And then this is another piece by Barbara Hepworth, again, 2 figures. And what style would you say this is? If you said minimalist, you are correct. And again, this could be interpreted, I think, as a man and a woman, the shorter one being the woman, the taller one being the male figure. So now we're going to compare and contrast 2 pieces. We're going to compare a work that is extremely realistic. It was painted by Grant Wood, and he was influenced by artists who were oil painters during the Renaissance, like Albrecht Dürer, and Albrecht Dürer did some very realistic oil paintings. And then Rosenthal is conceptual, and conceptual art is art where the concept is more important than the idea, or the concept, the idea of the art is more important than whether or not it's a beautiful painting or the artist has very masterfully captured something. In conceptual art, the thing that's important is, did the artist get their meaning across? So the style of a work, again, refers to the characteristic ways in which an artist expresses themselves and the times in which they live. And then conceptual art is, again, the ideas being expressed by the artist are more important than their physical expression. So here is Grant Wood's American Gothic. It is oil paint on something called beaver board. I have no idea what that is. I guess it must be a kind of illustration board. And let's take a look at this couple. They're extremely realistic, so much so that he's not even trying to prettify them. He's showing them kind of warts and all, and I often ask my students if these look like people that you would like to meet. Generally the answer is no, they don't look very friendly. And part of that is intentional on the artist's part. Grant Wood was trying in a lot of his works to make critiques about American society. And with this work of art, he was, kind of showing what a lot of people might see as the salt of the earth, American farmers, and that sort of thing, but also a kind of the narrow-mindedness that you might get in some white communities. And this was a subject that he tackled again and again through his use of realism. So you might say in some ways that he too is conceptual, but again, it's more of an idea of conveying the truth about American society. Now this next piece is by Donna Rosenthal. It's called He Said, She Said, Let's Get Physical, Do You Think I'm Sexy? And since I can't interact with you directly, I will tell you what I think about this piece. This piece, to me, is saying it's kind of about when people dress up at night and go out. Sometimes a woman might try to put across the idea that she's not necessarily looking for a relationship, she's just looking to get physical, and guys are much more upfront about being physical. That's my interpretation. You may have a slightly different take. But again, it's more about the concept. So what do you think the concept is? What is the artist saying? So here's some textbook definitions for you. So realism, as I've discussed, is the portrayal of people and things as they are seen by the eye or as they are thought to be without idealization, without distortion. And then realism with a capital R is also a style in that it was a specific school of art that flowered during the mid-19th century in France. It was actually a means of portraying things going on for working people, laborers, and so forth, as maybe a means of protest. And in photography, we often think of most photography as realistic, and we will come back to photography in Chapter 8. It is the technique of shooting, capturing, and documenting that suggests a candid truth and suggests reality, particularly in photojournalism, where they're trying to capture something happening to let the public know this is in fact happening now. Okay, so a couple more terms. So bear with me. Representational art represents natural objects in a recognizable manner, although not a realistic form. So a work of art, as in Jackson Pollock's Male and Female, can be representational, but also abstract, okay, because it represents something. And representational art or figurative art is defined as art that portrays, however altered or distorted, things perceived in the visible world. And then expressionistic art. In expressionistic art, form and color are freely distorted by the artist in order to achieve a heightened emotional impact. And then the Expressionists were also a modern art movement in about the 1940s and 50s. So expressionistic art, we have here El Greco's piece from the 16th century. And let's look at it. It's called The Death of Count Orgaz. Now, I don't know who Count Orgaz was or why he's important to this group of people, except that he was some sort of aristocrat who was important to the Spanish clergy who were all gathered around him there. And on the bottom half of the painting, you could pretty much draw a line straight across this painting between the line of people's heads and then the very strange thing looking up where it looks as though Count Orgaz is actually being received in heaven by Jesus and Mary. And then there's all these angels and stuff going on. So if we look in the bottom half of the painting, it's pretty realistic. You've got the robes of the clergy, very detailed. The embroidery and the brocade on this guy's robe is very realistic. Count Orgaz he looks pretty dead. His armor is captured in a lot of detail. So is the brocade on this gentleman's robe as well. And then you've got all these sort of noble figures behind him. And then suddenly the scene switches. It's very expressionistic. There's lots of brushstrokes. It's very emotional. He's being conveyed up to heaven. So we can say that this is painted in an expressionistic style, even though it was painted during the Spanish Renaissance, and the actual style that El Greco painted it was known as Mannerism. All right, more words. Abstract art. Abstract. Art that departs significantly from the actual appearance of things. So as I said, a work can still be representational, but be abstract. The next category is non-objective. So abstract art can also be non-objective. It makes absolutely no reference to nature or reality. And then Cubism is a type of abstract art where natural forms are transcribed into largely angular geometric equivalents. And then sometimes an artist might actually create a work of art. This was something that the Surrealists used a lot, where an artist attempts to clear their mind of purpose and concerns so that inner conflicts and ideas find expression through their works. So we're going to actually go down here and look first at George Braque's The Portuguese. And this is a work of art that can be said to be cubist. And he's actually, believe it or not, trying to portray a Portuguese guitarist. Where's the guitar? Well, you have to look for it, but it's kind of in here. And you get kind of a feeling of fingers maybe strumming and playing the guitar here. Maybe this could be an arm. This is the guy's face up here. But what Braque is doing is he's made it monochromatic. He's using, one family of colors. He's using a lot of shading in the way that he's broken up planes of the painting into geometric shapes. That's where the cubism comes in. And then there's stenciled letters and numbers throughout here that Braque was really into doing that. And that is meant to play with our perceptions of two-dimensional space on the canvas itself, and then illusions of three-dimensional space on the canvas. And then this work here could be said to be abstract and non-representational. This is Judy Pfaff's Voodoo of 1981. And you could also say she was employing psychic automatism, because what she did was she just basically free-form cut out a lot of pieces of colored paper and then let them fall kind of as they would on a piece of mylar, and then she collaged them all down. So it has no reference to actual reality, no reference to nature. However, she's given it a title, and the title makes us think, well, it must have subject matter. So it's kind of a bit of visual trickery. She's called it voodoo. And so when you hear that word, your eye kind of goes into that composition and maybe tries to find things. And maybe that's part of the whole automatism, of what's lurking in the subconscious, both for Judy Pfaff and for us as the viewers. So artists often title abstract works to provoke thought, as you just saw. Sometimes they will even call a work untitled because they don't want to have any associations created by that title. And sometimes they might title a non-objective work based on some association triggered by the work. For example, artists like Moreau and Whistler would often name their compositions after movements of music, so that they're trying to make you maybe see sounds. I don't know. So one of the issues that viewers have with non-objective work is viewers like art to make sense. They want it to make sense. But non-objective work is meant to be just that, non-objective. And our buddy Jackson Pollock, who we saw at the beginning, his work was meant to be completely abstract, completely non-objective. So form includes elements, design principles, and composition of a work of art. And things like this would include the colors used, textures, the shapes, if the artist is trying to give us an illusion of 3D, balance, rhythm, unity of design, and so forth. And the reason I keep mentioning Jackson Pollock is because he was very popular with the formalist critics. And as you read the definition down there, formalistic criticism involves the elements and design, but not the historical, biographical elements of a work of art. So his work was very popular with the formalists because they wanted to look at work that was only about form, that was only about color and shapes and things like that. And Jackson Pollock was trying to provide that with completely non-objective works of art. So I hope that makes some sense. So now we're going to look at work with content. And content is everything included in a work of art, not just lines and forms, but any possible underlining meanings or themes. So there are 3 levels of content in a work of art. It is the subject matter, what is the art about? The elements and the composition, or the formal elements, as I just mentioned, that were important to the formalists, and then not important to people like the formalists, but maybe to everybody else in the world looking at a work of art, are underlying or symbolic meanings or themes. So we're going to talk about this looking at some works. So we have 2 pieces here. One is by Jacques-Louis David from the 18th century, The Death of Marat. And on the right, we have Sandow Birk's Death of Manuel from the 20th century. And what's going on in both of these is a death. As you can see, that is the subject matter. But they have very different meanings. And one of the things Sandow Birk likes to do is take works of art from art history and give them a different twist, a more modern twist. So let's look first at The Death of Marat on the left. And I'm going to guess that you guys probably don't know a lot about revolutionary France. So that's what this painting actually is all about. And Jacques-Louis David, whose work we'll see in other circumstances, he was all about France and the Revolution. And he painted a lot of paintings that were filled with meaning for people who were in the know about what he was doing. As 21st century people looking at his work, it's hard for us to know what we mean. And when a lot of people first look at Death of Marat, they think they're looking at the picture of a suicide and that this man has written a suicide note. Whereas the painting on the right, most people are able to see this and know this was about a drive-by shooting. The guy is wearing his gang colors. There are bullet holes in the side of his Impala. It's pretty clear. So Death of Marat is not a suicide. This is about the death of a revolutionary figure during the French Revolution. Marat was somebody who was working very hard with the French Revolution to help free the French people from the monarchy. And he's pictured here in a bathtub because he often took special baths. He had a skin condition. And his bath looks bloody not because he's bleeding out from a self-inflicted wound, but because his lover has poisoned the bath. He was in love with a woman who was on the other side. She was a counter-revolutionary, and she actually had written him this note telling him to meet her somewhere and, dress up, bathe for me. So she poisoned his bath, and there he is dead. And so this was basically a portrait that David did to celebrate this figure and give him his props, even though he died a tragic death. So when we know something about the historical circumstances under which a work of art was created, we can understand maybe what's new about it in terms of style and composition, but we can also understand its historical significance. And understanding the relationship between those 2 paintings we just saw can make each one more meaningful to the viewer. So now we're going to look at another Jacques-Louis David painting. This is The Oath of the Horatii. And what we have here, if you look at it, the way it's painted, it looks as though these people are all in Roman dress. This was painted in 1784, so not Roman times. And what's it about? Well, I'm going to tell you what it's about, because as 21st century people, the meaning would be lost to us. So there's several things you need to know about this painting. One is it was actually painted as a commission to hang in a royal palace. So it's subversive because what it is a secret message David was conveying to the French people during the French Revolution. It is a literal call to arms. This gentleman here is holding up these swords. And what's actually going on, the original story is the Horatii were a Roman family. And these three brothers are the brothers of the Horatii. This is their father. They are pledging on their swords to go to battle against this other family. So that's thing one going on here, and they're pledging to do this, and they're basically, pledging we will come back victorious or we won't come back. And then the subtext going on back here is these are women, and women are usually left behind in war, and you see this woman over here is just kind of collapsed in grief with 2 children, and she is weeping because her love is on the other side. And so she's weeping because she knows somebody is going to die that she loves one way or the next. And for the French Revolution, you have people who were on both sides, families that were on both sides. So everybody was going to stand to lose something from it. So there's that painting. This one's a little bit more easy to read, mainly because we're being given the text right on the piece there. It's a piece of word art by Barbara Kruger, untitled We Don't Need Another Hero. Now, some context for you all, because this was immediately recognizable to me at my age, because this imagery, these 2 kids, Sally and I think it was Sally, Dick, and Jane, were in my school books that taught me how to read when I was in kindergarten and 1st grade, and they were always, getting into little hijinks and things and things like that. So she is basically saying we don't need another hero. They're taking something out of the original context and giving it a more modern meaning about male and female relationships. And if you look at it in contrast to this one, here we have women who are weeping because men want to be heroes. Here we have a girl saying, I don't need you to be my hero. All right, so next, iconography. So this is where we get into some of the underlying symbolism and themes in works of art. Iconography is, in fact, the study of the themes and the symbols in visual arts and works of art. Icons, that word originally comes from Byzantine artworks that were meant to represent saints and things like that, and it's come to mean the study of symbols. So, for example, somebody in a painting might paint winter as a symbol of death and aloneness. Somebody might paint something about the fall as a symbol of harvest and decline. So awareness of symbolism can enrich our viewing experience. So I'm going to show you something that on the face of it you think is going to look crazy. Ta-da! All right, that looks wild, right? What do you think's going on in this picture? Looks like a wild and crazy orgy, doesn't it? Yeah. So this was painted for one of the Medicis, who was a very wealthy guy in the Renaissance, by the painter Bronzino. And Bronzino usually painted fairly stately portraits of people, so this is crazy looking. So let me explain to you what this means. So it's called Venus, Cupid, Folly, and Time. So the first thing that you need to know, time. Whose time in this picture? Time is, where's my arrow? There's my arrow, is this guy right here. And what's time doing? He's pulling back a curtain. Okay, so you'll notice down here it's called the exposure of luxury. So just hold on to that thought for a moment. So it's also got Venus, Cupid, and Folly in it. So Folly, we could say, could be represented by this little guy here who's about to fling rose petals onto this licentious-looking couple. Not only are they licentious, it's incestuous, because this is Venus. And who is Venus's son? Venus's son is Cupid. And what's he doing? Well, he's fondling her breast and kissing her in a way that not so motherly, right? So that looks really weird to our modern eyes, and we might be shocked and horrified, but there's a deeper meaning afoot here. So, and what is that deeper meaning? Well, I don't mean to make a joke about something being afoot, but, sorry, Cupid's foot is right here, and Cupid's foot is about to step on a dove. What do doves represent? Okay, doves can represent love. Doves also represent innocence and purity. So he's about to step on innocence and purity. And then back here we have two theatrical masks. And although they're cast aside for the moment, they are basically representations of, not being truthful, of dishonesty, of things like, not being adultery, stuff like that. Okay, so, and then these guys back here, you've got this guy sort of shrieking in anger, and then you've got this figure here. I don't remember which is which. We'll go to the next slide in a second, because that represents, one of them is meant to represent syphilis, another one represents unfaithfulness, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But the overall meaning of this painting is that time is going to expose foolishness. It's going to expose folly. It's going to expose lies. It's going to expose defeat. If you have indiscriminate sexual relationships, you might get syphilis. You might cause other people pain. So there's a lot of deeper meaning to this than when at first you look at it. So it wasn't just made to, be disgusting. So this is actually mentioned in Vasari's book. Vasari wrote a series of books about the lives of the Renaissance artists, and this was actually sent to King Francis, who was the King of France. And okay, these are all the figures. So it's nude Venus with Cupid kissing her. On one side, pleasure and play with other loves. And then on the other side, fraud, jealousy, and other passions. And then there's also the hourglass and wing, so that's time, which interestingly Vasari did not mention. Okay, so here we've got the breakdown. The howling figure on the left has been interpreted as jealousy, despair, and the effects of syphilis. The boy scattering roses and stepping on a thorn is jest, folly, and pleasure. And the hybrid creature with the face of a girl is pleasure and fraud. And then the figure in the top left corner is fraud and oblivion. So it's very erotic. Because the French are known for, being a little bit less prudish about these things than, let's say the English or the Italians, but it was probably sent by an Italian, Cosimo de' Medici, who ruled Florence, and who Bronzino was the court painter to. Bronzino was also an accomplished poet, so the picture shows he was interested in love lyrics and also more body poetic genres of the time. So, lot deeper meaning than you might think. It's sophisticated and it's erotic, which again, that would be something that the French would have loved. So this next piece, completely different. This is painted in 1993 by an artist named Willie Bester. It's called Semikazi, Migrant Miseries, in parentheses. And so let me tell you a couple things about this. When you look at it, you can see some things like this. These look like the bars of a prison. They're also the springs that would go under a bed. You've got a bike wheel here. You've got some adorable kids here. You've got a Bible here with a chain and a lot of other figures. So what's going on here? Well, again, I'm going to tell you a little bit and then we'll break it down even more so. This was painted in 1993. As I mentioned, Willie Bester is a South African artist. 1993 was the last year of the apartheid system in South Africa. Willie Bester was a completely self-trained artist because people of color during that era in South Africa could not be trained in schools. They were not allowed. So Willie Bester not only had to teach himself, he also had to assemble his own materials and kind of figure it out on his own. And he was very clever in appropriating things from junkyards and things that he just found around into his artworks. So once you know that, that's kind of interesting. So let's go to the next slide. Again, he was an artist, ruled as a colored artist, not allowed formal training. And here we go. He combines junk, scrap metal, bones, shoes, tins, photographs, and oil paint in his collages. And Semikazi, in one of the South African languages, means migrant miseries. So it's telling the story also of Mr. Semikazi, and he kind of is like Alfred or Willie Bester himself. He's selling wire and other cast-off scraps that he collects from the streets and dumps around the South African town's crossroads. And he can only afford one bed, which we see there in the center of the composition, and it's crossed with barbed wire so that comfort and pain are joined together, and it also looks like a prison as well. And then in the foreground there's a Bible that is connected to the bed by a chain, and what it symbolizes is that during those times African nations were not only were they run on Christian beliefs, but a lot of times those Christian beliefs were either exploited to keep people enslaved or were Christian values, which say how can we enslave one another, were clearly not allowed to, have full expression. So there's kind of a hypocrisy there. And then to the left of the bed, there's an image of a family. So Willie wanted to lead a family life, but it was very hard in those days because a lot of the men would have been sent away from their homes and their families to do jobs in other townships. So, but he still includes things like the smiling young children to show that there's still hope for the future. So knowing those things, as it says there, can that change your interpretation of what you just saw? And I think it certainly can. So I'm concluding here, and that's the end of part 1. At this point, what you may want to do in your academic travels is go over to the quizzes. And some of you may have already taken the first quiz, but there's quiz 1 on chapters 1 through 4. And I'm going to give you a little tip here. So in content, if you look down into the vocab lists, I have vocab lists for each of the chapters. Do yourself a favor, print out these 4 chapters and go take the quiz. And you should do very well indeed. So I hope you have a great day, and I will hopefully talk with you all soon.